like to call to order the Business Services Committee meeting for Community Unit School District 303 at 5:33 p.m. Before we get started on today's agenda, after item A, on behalf of the board, I would like to ask for a moment of silence in recognition of the situation in Texas. Thank you. That will move us to item B, citizens' comments. Do we have citizens' comments tonight? Okay. Dr. Pearson, that brings us to 1C, the superintendent's report.
Well, good evening. Thank you so much. I just wanted to mention that, of course, yesterday was the last day of school and we had a successful close to the school year, thanks to our staff, our students, and our families in the district. So thank you, board, for your support. And as we turn the page to the month of June, we just flip now to some of our summer activities and summer schedule. I wanted to mention that we have quite a few things starting on June the 6th, including our EL summer school program, which is at Richmond, our extended school year program at Fox Ridge. Our high school summer school will also begin on the June 6th for both the online and in-person classes. And then I also wanted to highlight the fact that many of our staff members are participating in professional learning this summer. We currently are offering 16 courses and 1 workshop. And so far, 384 of our staff have signed up to participate in our summer professional learning. And that also begins on the 6th of June. So that completes the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Dr. Pearson. That brings us to the 4 discussion items in 2A, the Mid-Valley Financial Report.
So Mid-Valley is reporting that they are on target to end the school year within their budget parameters. So there are no areas of concern at this time.
Thank you. That brings us to 2B, the D303 financial report for April 30.
Both revenue and expenditures continue to trend ahead of the prior year. And as I mentioned last month, the district has received the 3rd categorical payment in April, and it is reflected in this report. There are no other areas of concern at this time. And please note that the investment report is attached for your review.
Thank you. That brings us to 2C, the COVID-19 financial impact summary.
There were no COVID-related grant expenditures, no additional expenditures in the month of April. We did receive notice that FEMA has released payment for the funds through the FEMA grant. That was about $348,000. So right now we're just waiting on IEMA to process that payment, and we should be receiving a payment, I would assume, within the next few weeks.
Thank you. Without any questions associated with that, we'll move on to 2D, the facility master plan update. Oh, before we do that, let's go back. We have a question.
What do we have the 348,000 earmarked for?
Those were all expenses that already occurred. I believe that was a lot of PPE and cleaning supplies that was purchased at the beginning of the pandemic. So we've already expended the money. This is just a reimbursement.
So this would be 2021 expenses. Probably.
It would be fiscal year 2021. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Floor is yours.
Good evening, Mr. Wagner, Board of Education. Tonight, we wanted to just bring you an update. Ms. Andrews is here from WALD to share with us the meetings that have happened already at the schools with the teams. And we still have a couple meetings that we have to do with athletics and music and science at a couple of schools, but we're wrapping it all up. And at our next business services meeting, we will have a report of the findings and the culmination of the information. So Ms. Andrews.
Thank you. So as Mr. Baird mentioned, we've been meeting the last couple of weeks with a number of groups, including LRCs at middle school and both high schools, culinary programs for both high schools, as well as the performing arts. We still have yet to meet with the North High School Science Group and athletics at both of the high schools. And then we're planning to make sure that that conversation also includes in the new athletic director that'll be getting in July. So as mentioned, our plan would be to bring a more comprehensive report once all those meetings have wrapped up to the next business services meeting.
Thank you. I don't see any questions from board members associated with the facility plan update. That moves us to 2E, the district-wide gymnasium and community room HVAC improvements.
As we talked about earlier in January and February, we had talked about lead times and things that were coming in. We had, the board had made the decision that we were looking at, wanting to air condition the gymnasiums and the community rooms. So what we're asking here, as you go forward, is that they can start the design process. And we would actually like, at the bottom, we are requesting that the Board of Education authorize administration to pre-purchase the HVAC. Right now, the lead times are between 42 and 52 weeks for some of that equipment. So if they can at least start the design process and we can go move ahead, and then we can bid the labor and the other piece to it later, that's what we are hoping to do. So we would ask that we can move ahead and do the design process for all those community rooms and gymnasiums. I will tell you, I apologize, Mr. Lackner, there is one piece that we did ask for an alternate. For an addition just of the field house. That is not included in some of the documentation that we have now, but we will be adding that on that if that was something the board would so choose to do. Okay.
So on the list that you provided here, Mr. Baird, so the community and gymnasium HVAC improvements, are those listed underneath that, or are these all separate things in addition to?
No, these are in addition to. The reason I put this on here and gave this sheet, I was actually going to talk to this more after the Haynes emergency, which is down a little bit further. But what we're seeing is, I put this on the list so you knew at the very top, if we can review that briefly right now, at the very top, that tells you what is going to be happening. And for John Paulman, when he comes in, what is prepared for him to be teed up to be completed this summer. During the course of this last 6 months, it was determined that some of our chillers and HVAC and univents would not be here on time. So if you notice down below, it says summer 2022 projects that have been moved to 2023 due to the supply chain issues. While we'll receive the Anderson univents, Pearson Creek univents, Fox Ridge, the Redling Middle School chiller and North High School, they will not be able to be installed until next summer. That's why I wanted to, even though that was going to be for this year 5-year cap, because we don't have them yet. We'll receive them during the start of the school year next year. It'll have to be put into next year to be installed. Okay. But at the bottom, I did want you to see what is already set to be installed for next summer. The one thing we agreed to, and that's why I separated it, was the top piece was the district-wide gymnasium and community rooms, because if we can at least get that design process started and then get that to the co-op, we can at least get those things in the wheelhouse and then bid in November or December. Does that make sense? And then the things down below, you'll notice in the next two, Ms. Fairgrave, because that's I asterisk the North High School chiller and the Anderson RTU, because once again, those are mechanical. And those are two things that we probably ought to also include in going out to the co-op to purchase equipment only. So I just added those just so you could see what we're going to be looking at over the course of the next 13 to 14 months.
So what's the risk by pushing out another year, the 5 items, the chillers, et cetera?
I'm sorry, which 5 are you?
The Anderson, Pearson Creek, Fox Ridge, the ones that were moved to next summer.
We don't have them. The intent was, when we first approved this back in December, the intent was that those were going to be delivered and we were going to be able to install them this summer.
Right.
They're caught. So they're just happening to be moved.
Right. So my question is, because we're going to get them in the fall, right? Okay.
Right.
So, but we won't do them until next summer.
Correct.
So what is the risk of that delay? What's the impact of that?
As right now, as we get the machines, we're going to be able to store them until the HVAC stuff. There really isn't anything for us. We've had the companies that have held their bid and they still plan to put them in. I just can't have them do infrastructure because that will leave us without anything.
So what
Okay.
she's asking though
I'm
is
sorry.
what could happen if we don't do it now? It's just, we'll still use the old equipment. I mean, your only risk is it could break
If
down.
it breaks down.
Right.
I
correct.
apologize. I
Okay,
misunderstood.
All right. Thank you.
On that note, should the equipment break down and we have this, if it breaks down sometime in the fall and we have this stuff, I'm assuming then rather than doing some sort of stopgap repair, we would find a way to put these in.
In the unifence, it's not as easy, Mr. McNally, just because they're different size. So we'd have to do some different things. And there's piping and things. So it wouldn't be as easy, but we can limp these along and, make sure the univents are at the end of their useful life. They're not breaking down. We can maintain them. It just doesn't, we'll be able to limp along through the heat season. So these are primarily for heat.
Are there any options for any backup plans just in case one unit may fail?
Absolutely.
Is that something we should look at or you have maybe already?
We have looked at that. So the existing univents, there are parts and pieces that we have to be able to repair the existing univent. It's just not, these are 30, 35-year-old units that are inefficient. And yes, we can limp them along and put them together and keep them going until we can do this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Without additional questions, I think that moves us to moving that recommendation to the for action agenda item in the next regular board meeting. And that moves us for discussion to F, the designation of depository.
So according to board policy 430, there is supposed to be an annual review of all of the approved depositories for district cash. And the board needs to approve a resolution each year. So we're bringing that forward. Last year, we had 8 depositories on our list, either for banking services or for investment services. The one we're bringing to you this year has 9 because we've added Wintrust.
Okay, so I see the resolution draft. We'll add that to the for action agenda in the next board meeting. Thanks. That brings us to 2G, the review of the first draft of the fiscal year 22-23 budget.
I apologize, somehow we skipped way ahead. Okay, there we go. So although we typically start talking about the budget in May, the budget development process is a year-long process. So it begins with the development of the tax levy in late fall and the 5-year projections in the winter. Several drafts are presented to the board for feedback throughout the spring and summer, and it ends with adoption of the budget in September. There we go. So tonight, the board will review the first draft of the fiscal year 23 budget, and in the coming months, we will continue to refine this budget with a final draft presentation scheduled for July. So this chart shows the breakdown of revenue sources for the operating budget. As is typical for school districts in Northern Illinois, the majority of the district's revenue is from property taxes. Additionally, the proportion of federal dollars included in this budget is slightly higher than in previous years due to the remainder of the ESSER funding being included in this budget. So it can get a little confusing as we talk about consumer price index and the impact to the budget. And we will talk a little bit about the implications of the 21 CPI to this budget later in the presentation. The fiscal year 23 budget includes revenue generated from a combination of the 2021 levy and the 2022 levy. Both CPI figures are known at this time, but what is unknown is the equalized assessed valuation for 2022, which has a large impact on the 22 tax levy. As a result, we had to include a couple assumptions and estimate the total levy revenue for this next fiscal year at $174.1 million. So this is a graphical look at historical CPI values. And as I'm sure you're all aware, CPI in 2022 was the highest it has been in almost 40 years. CPI for this current year is currently 8.3% year over year, but we aren't even midway through the year. So this figure will continue to fluctuate in the coming months. Because of the significant effect CPI can have on our budget, we are tracking it very closely, and we will make changes prior to budget adoption if necessary. And as a reminder, the board also reserves the right to amend the budget if actual numbers are significantly different from our projected numbers. The most significant highlight in state funding that's included in this version of the budget is that the state is currently up to date on payments. So we just recently received third quarter payment for categorical grants in April, and we are assuming they will continue to make timely payments in the following year as well. We are also projecting investment income to increase slightly from this fiscal year due in part to the rate increases from the Federal Reserve. Revenue from student fees will remain relatively flat, as will our typical federal funding. We will, however, see a little bit of a decrease in federal meal reimbursements due to the return to the traditional national school lunch program. So this graph shows the breakdown of expenditures in the operating budget, and as will always be the case in school districts, salaries and benefits make up the most significant portion by far. Salaries in this draft budget have all been included per the collective bargaining agreements and at the board approved increases. We are also projecting an increase of 4% to health insurance in the upcoming year, but we will continue to refine that based on data from our insurance consultant. So as I mentioned earlier, CPI is the highest it has been in nearly 40 years, and that does have a significant impact on our budget. The largest challenge that we face in an economic environment such as this is timing, and when we experience the increases to each side of the income statement. So wages in all industries continue to increase due to the shortage of workers, and the wage increases included in this budget reflect the current market conditions and the board's desire to employ quality staff in all areas of the organization. As supply chain issues persist, we are also seeing increases to the cost of goods and contracted services, and the market's willingness to pay those higher prices have tempered any downward pressure at this time, at least in the short term. On the other side, revenue for the district will not increase at anywhere near the same rate as expenditures this year, and that is all due to the timing of the tax levy. For the majority of the fiscal year, the school district will operate with revenue received from the 2021 tax levy, which was included at an increase of 1.4%. We will not see the increase in revenue from the higher CPI until the next tax levy, which leads to an imbalance of revenues and expenditures for this 1 year. If we look at the district's operating funds, there in this draft of the budget, there is a projected deficit of $2.1 million, which is due to the issues that we just discussed. It is projected that these funds will balance again once fiscal year 2024 hits, and we can experience the full extent of the higher revenue receipts. If we look at all funds, there's a projected deficit of 5.8 million. However, it is important to note that 3 million of that deficit is due to one-time construction projects in the capital improvement plan. I do also want to stress again that this is the first draft of the budget. We will continue to refine these numbers as much as we reasonably can between now and the final draft presentation in July. So these are the next steps. So as I mentioned, we will continue to refine the budget assumptions and projections over the next few months. We will bring the final budget draft back to the Business Services Committee in July. And then in August, the board will establish the public hearing date. We will put the budget on display, and then the board will hold the public hearing, and we will ask the board to adopt the budget in September. Are there any questions?
Just one question for my own edification. Last year, what was this year it's 174.1 million in property tax revenue?
Correct.
Do you, if you don't know, it's okay. I'm curious if you knew what it was last year.
I don't know the exact number offhand. It was in the neighborhood. It was just higher than 165 million. I want to say it was about 168. It was in that neighborhood.
All right, thank you.
Aside from the CPI issue, which you've explained well in terms of the lagging effect on revenue, but the absolutely present effect on cost, are there other elements of either the revenue assumptions that you've made in the plan or the cost assumptions that you've made in the plan with which you have some discomfort or where you expect more volatility than is typical?
No, but really the big question mark right now is cost of goods and what the supply chain looks like. As long as inflation remains at a higher level, there's going to be a giant question mark as to what we're going to pay for goods upcoming. I mean, really, truly, at this point, it depends on what economist you listen to as to where we're headed on this, because there are conflicting opinions out there where either we're going to continue through this period of inflation, or inflation is eventually going to stop, but we're going to quickly move into a recessionary period, neither of which is good for the school district. But we will continue to, budget conservatively. We'll continue to spend conservatively, and we'll do everything we can to make sure that the school district is in good financial condition. Really, we're in kind of an unprecedented time right now, so it's difficult to look and say, especially when the country's foremost economists can't agree on where we're headed right now. So it really is difficult to say what cost of goods and cost of services will look like over the next year, but we're doing everything we can in this budget to make sure we shield the district from that.
I think it's comforting to recognize that one of the biggest element is contractual labor. And so the volatility and the exposure that we have to cost increases on the cost of goods is only in that 30% of the total budget that could, and it's a subset of that 30%. So
Correct.
I understand that it can be an impact. It won't be a giant swing.
And I just have a comment. I appreciate what you had said, Mr. Attaway, in terms of continuing to monitor spending from a conservative standpoint, and really just for the rest of the board. I think it's looking to be very critical that we monitor all expenses in the coming year, especially where we're projected to be right now. So.
Other questions or comments on the initial draft budget? Looks like no. Looks like that brings us to the first draft budget for Mid-Valley.
The first budget draft, I spoke with Nancy Spohr at Mid-Valley. So the first budget draft that they've put together does right now include roughly a 24% increase in operating expenditures from fiscal year 22 to fiscal year 23. They very similarly are working through some details on their budget right now, and they should be at the July meeting to present their final draft of the budget along with D303.
Seeing no questions, that moves us to item I, the setting the amount for the treasurer surety bond.
So each year the board needs to approve the expenditure for a treasury bond for the board treasurer. Basically, it needs to be at least 25% of the amount of all money with which the board treasurer is able to access. That amount last year was $40 million. The amount of the bond was $40 million, and we don't see a significant change in that amount. So we are recommending a $40 million bond again this year.
And that authorization will move to the regular board meeting for action. That brings us to item J, the change of authorized agent for the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund.
So the district is required to have someone designated as the authorized agent with the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund. That person has been Alexi Montavon, but she is leaving the district at the end of this year. So we are recommending that the board approve Kristen Brunson, who is her replacement, as the new authorized agent for IMRF.
Seeing no questions, we'll move that resolution to the action item for the next regular board meeting. That brings us to item K on the agenda, the playground and maintenance agreement between D303 and St. Charles Park District.
So this is just a renewal contract. Sorry, Justin. This is just a renewal contract with the St. Charles Park District to have our ongoing agreement for our replacement program, in addition to their inspection program, where they inspect our facilities every single month, give us the feedback, and then we fix it. But it's the exact same renewal that we update with them.
And just as a note to the board, the attorney has reviewed this agreement and is okay with all of the terms included.
Seeing no questions, that moves us to the next item associated with the agenda here, which is item L, the Munhall Elementary School Playground Improvements.
I know last year was sort of exciting at Bell Graham with our visiting rodent, but what we have going into this year is we have a selection process that sort of went through all the systems. We include the labor in those conversations on the hiring, and we are moving that we go forward with the playground replacement at Munhall with the Park District. They've taken it out to bid, and we're excited about moving forward. And as you can see, we had allocated 150,000. We are under. We will be spending 140,590 out of our process to replace the two playgrounds at the back of Munhall.
Any questions or commentary associated with that? I appreciate that that project is done in cooperation with the St. Charles Park District. So there's a positive move there. Without questions, then I guess that moves us to item M, the Haynes Center Emergency RTU replacement.
Thank you. And that was one of the reasons I had given you the sheet to identify any mechanical things that are coming up. I know about a month ago, we were all in this room. It has been trying to manipulate and maintain the RT unit, the rooftop unit that is located on the top of this facility. We were able to put a condensing coil in there so we could control the air the best that we could in here for cooling. The reason I brought this forward to you is because we can limp it again. We can fix it to get it through to the fall, but this needs full replacements. It's rusted out. We have issues on this unit, and if we can order this ahead of time, that way we will have it in place and in our hands for next summer installation. So that's why you see this unit more coming to you as an emergency.
How old is it?
25 years. And, you know, we do have 25-year units and 20-year-old units that are still up and running. It just, I think, if you remember, we used to have the 2-story out here, and we used to, you know, we just had a lot of fluctuation. Hindsight, with our previous architect, we probably should have thought of replacing it when we demolished the other section of the building. But it will serve us well, and we won't have to talk about it for another 30 years.
Without additional questions, we'll move this for action on the next agenda item.
Thank you.
That brings us to item N, the disposal of surplus equipment.
The Board of Education knows that through COVID, we took a lot of furniture and things out. We're still storing at the mall. During that course of time, we purchased a lot of desks for the high school in particular and the middle schools. At this time, we have assets that we're going to be bringing forward to you. We have roughly 200 tables that are in there that are roughly 25 years old. We were going to try to look at it as possible surplus to be able to let other school districts or faith communities, if they wanted to, have those. Okay, they're not usable by us anymore. We have enough of our furniture and things like that, but they're just, at this time, that was one of the first steps after going to the mall and looking through some of our things. Principals have gone through all of their tables for lunch. There are other things. We're going to start bringing those items back to the schools over the next couple weeks, and we're just going to start moving through things. That would give us the opportunity to lessen some of those assets. In addition to that, each year we have vehicles that our vehicles, as we buy them and we utilize them outside, they usually, you know, have rust. They have different issues that come to the vehicles. And when vehicles are determined that it doesn't make sense to fix them anymore, it's better to sell them as is or sell them for scrap. We do this with buses. This year we have 4 vehicles coming forward to you. Three of the 2013 vans are over roughly 150,000 miles. They were used to transport some of our special ed students at times, and we just are in no need of them anymore, or do we want to maintain them? So on this sheet in particular, you have 4 vehicles coming forward that we would like to discard, along with the 200 tables.
Procedurally, do we require a vote associated with that, and can we put it on the consent agenda?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Any questions or discussion associated with the disposal?
Is it likely that these vehicles will be sold?
I'm sorry?
Is it likely that these vehicles will be sold with used car
They will be
value?
below Blue Book. We have our mechanic identified. They likely will be sold, but is in an as is. Okay, understanding that the transmissions and what they were utilized for, but it would be as is.
Well, if there isn't further discussion on it, we'll move that to the consent agenda in the next regular meeting. That brings us to item O, annual district IT renewals.
There are two technology renewals that are for the board's consideration tonight. One is for Zoom video conferencing at a cost not to exceed $40,000 for the year. And the other one is Google G Suites Enterprise, which does most of the security management and priority support tools for the 15,000 Google accounts that the district has. So that is coming in at a cost not to exceed $50,000. And both of these are renewals.
Given that these are renewals, I'd suggest that we put them on the consent agenda for the next regular meeting. Any additional questions about those items? And that moves us to number 3, adjournment. And before we do that, we can talk about future agenda items. Mr. Attaway's already talked about the budget process, and we see the preview of those agenda items. Are there other things that business services should be addressing?
I have a question. Were we going to look over the contract for the legal firm?
That hasn't been on the agenda, and I think it's a really good thing for us to add to the agenda. So let's have a discussion in the next business services meeting about legal services and the scope of those services and whether or not it makes sense for us to consider taking that out to the market.
Okay, thank you.
Without the suggestion of other agenda items, and there's always an opportunity to address that differently through the agenda setting process, I think we move to 3B, the adjournment. Thank you.